Hi, it's Richard from Intelligent Advisor IT Consulting with another in our series about the example projects. This time the project is slightly different because it was designed to be deployed as a web service. It's a shame in a way that because of the nature of examples that there aren't more examples of web service, because they are a very strong feature of Oracle Intelligent Advisor, and there are many customers who use Oracle Intelligent Advisor almost exclusively for web services. But now that we're here, let's make the most of this example. The business scenario is really very straightforward. If I go to Project and Example Projects, I can select Service Delta. So that's the name of the project. It comes from the telco or high-tech field, and it's a really simple idea that you're very familiar with. When you have a contract with a mobile phone provider, you get services, voicemail, so on. And when you change plan, sometimes you add services, sometimes you keep services, and sometimes you lose services. So all this is doing is demonstrating that if you move from plan A to plan B, this is what you'll keep, this is what you'll lose, and this is what you'll gain. Because it is primarily designed to be used as a web service, there is almost no user interface. In fact, they've added an interview so you can test it if you don't have access to web service, but it was not designed to be used as an interview. And as a result, it has leveraged the test case feature, which is a very important part of any project, but especially so in a web service, to be able to demonstrate the different features and to test the logic of the engine. Let's take a look at the data model and then see what's what. So it's very straightforward. You have an inferred entity called the service, and it has two relationships that have been created: the existing services and the future services. So the existing services is a set of services. You'll notice that the reverse relationship is also populated here because we want sometimes to know if the customer has that service. So if we were looking at a service and we could go back to our parent, and if there was no parent, basically we'd be saying that there is no customer using that service. Same for the future services. We'll also be considering what you will have if you change plan from plan A to plan B. The service itself has a name and has two booleans telling us whether it existed in the past and whether it exists in the future, and an action based on that. For example, do I keep it, do I lose it, or do I get it? So basically, if it was there in the past but it's not there anymore, you lose it. If it's there in both, you keep it. And if it's not in there in the beginning but it's there at the end, you get it. As I said a moment ago, the interview itself is very, very simple. It was not designed to really be used except for debugging purposes. So let's go and examine how this works. First of all, from a straightforward perspective, I will say that I'm currently on home plan 1 and I want to switch to executive plan. What does that mean for me? It means that I would keep voicemail, but I would gain these three services. If I move from home plan 1 to home plan 2, I would keep voicemail, but I would get 24-hour support. If I was to go from executive plan to home plan 1, I would keep voicemail, but I would lose all these. So you can probably see where this is going. It's giving you a kind of provisioning output to say, stop this, start this, keep this. And you can see over on the Data tab that we have our list of services. So this is a list of services defined in the project: voicemail, 24-hour support, and so on. And we can see that for each of the services, we can see that it existed previously, it is not in the future, therefore, well, it's going to be stopped. And we can see that it's currently connected. It has a parent in the existing case, but not in the future, which is another way for us to tell that it was required in the beginning, but it's not required in the new plan. Let's take a moment to switch over to the test case. As I said before, that little interview was just so you can get a feel for it. But in real life, you don't go to the trouble of building an interview if you don't need one. So how do you test the logic of your web service? you use a test case, or hundreds, thousands of test cases. So you can see in this particular demonstration test case file that we have, well, about 25. We have 25 cases. And the first 5 cases all concern moving from home plan 1 to one of these. The second 5 concern home plan 2 and moving to one of these. So they've kind of run through all the different scenarios. So imagine that I'm on home plan 1 and I move to home plan 1, which basically means nothing should happen because I haven't changed anything. Let's reset this and try it out. Home plan 1 to home plan 1. Voicemail should be retained. There you go. So voicemail should be retained. The only service you had was voicemail, and the only one you keep is voicemail. The details of the services and what we expect to see in each of the scenarios is over here on the Service tab. So in test case 1, the service voicemail, we're expecting it to be retained. And that's exactly what we just saw in the debugger. So you can read this as my expectation is that in scenario number 1, voicemail should be retained. If I was to say that my expectation was voicemail should be stopped in test case number 1, and I run my test cases, I will see an error message. Because Oracle Policy Modeling says, no, I disagree. You are wrong. You expected it to be stopped, but I'm afraid actually the answer is retained. So an expected column is a great way of testing what you think is going to happen. It's often used in regression testing. So you've made a change and you know what should happen because you've run them before, or you know the web service, but now you're running it to see if there's anything that's different. And if there is something that's different, it's probably you who've introduced the difference. And maybe you wanted to, but the point is that you'll be able to check your expected behavior with the actual behavior. Speaking of actual behavior, of course, as you probably already know, you can also have the same column listed as an actual output. You can have either of these or both of them. So if you're not sure what the actual result will be, so forget about what you're expecting, just imagine you don't know what the actual outcome will be. So let's say I've never used this before, I have no clue what the answer is going to be. Well, I could just use an actual column and let OPM fill in the results for me. So this is the actual outcomes. Once I have that, over time, it may be that I then switch to using the expected version because I now know what to expect and I'm really highlighting the things that have changed. So let's take another example. In test case number 2, it concerns 2 services and one should be retained and one should be started. Let's go and look at test case number 2. Test case number 2 is home plan 1 to home plan 2. And it involves 2 services. That much we've just seen. The 2 services were listed here. The 2 services were voicemail and 24-hour support. So I'll go to home plan 1 and home plan 2. And let's go over to the debugger. And we'll say home plan 1 to home plan 2. Voicemail should be retained. 24-hour support should be started. Voicemail should be retained. 24-hour support should be started. So you can see that the test case file is a really quite efficient way of writing out and testing scenarios. I can't stress enough that if you write any kind of Oracle Policy Modeling project, whether it be interview, web service, or chat, or mobile, whatever it is, a project without test cases is not a project that's going to be delivered. Nobody wants to have a project that's never been properly tested. I expect to see dozens and dozens and dozens of unit tests and business tests and outlier tests. That's what a test case is for. You should never ever have a project that doesn't have test cases. I'm just using this example as a way of explaining a little bit about how test cases work. If you're interested, there are plenty of articles on the website about how to get the most out of test cases. Back to our Back to our project. Of course, as we said before, this project was originally designed to be deployed as a web service. So if you're lucky enough to have an Oracle Intelligent Advisor hub at your disposal, you will be looking to deploy this to be able to use it as a web service. When you deploy it as a web service, when you are able to deploy a project as a web service by accessing the hub and making sure that you have checked the correct channel, it means, of course, that you can then use your chosen platform like SOAP UI, or in this case Postman, to execute either the REST or the SOAP-based service that you've chosen. In my case, for the demo, I've just decided to use the REST-based batch service. So I have an authorization through a client API, an API client token. And you'll notice if I look at the body, you can see that the body is made up of two parts: the outcomes that I want to see in my project and the cases, each case representing one particular scenario. So from Home Plan 1 to Home Plan 2, that's scenario number 1. Home Plan 1 to Executive Plan is case number 2. So I could, of course, add more of these. And in terms of outcomes, I want to see the service name and I want to see the service status. So if I now run this, I will see that in case number 1, voicemail was retained, 24-hour support was started. And in case number 2, voicemail was retained, online billing was started, 24-hour support was started, and priority service was started. So I'm seeing a similar output to that which I saw in the debugger, only of course in JSON. And if I want to have the explanation, or the decision report as it's known, I can specify that for 24-hour support service action, so I could do this for each of the different services, but I'll just do it for 24-hour support. I want to see the decision report, which means that 24-hour support, I now have for the 24-hour support action a complete detailed decision report, which you should find very familiar, because if I go in here, and I think scenario number 1 was, what was scenario number 1? Scenario number 1 was Home Plan 1 to Home Plan 2. Home Plan 1 to Home Plan 2, so it's the right one. And we can look at "24-hour support service action," which, in case you're wondering where that came from, 24-hour support service action. 24-hour support service action. And we'll look at view in debugger. 24-hour support service action is started. We have the list of services, services voicemail. And if you look here, you'll actually see in the output that you're looking at the equivalent of the decision report that I've just shown you in the debugger. So by manipulating the outcome, we can display more or less detail, and indeed we can choose to have more or less attributes displayed in the outcome for each of our cases. If you get an opportunity to work with web services, as you probably will, it's important that you have access to a hub to be able to play around with services like this, deploy the demos and play with them. I used REST for my demo, but you could equally use the SS, which is XML based, same results, slightly different format, but same principle. And there are other services. If you're interested in digging into the web services, go and have a look on the website, search for web services. There's dozens of articles about them in different contexts. That just about wraps it up for our Service Delta project, a little project that packs a powerful punch and is a really interesting way to look at inferring entities, but also web services and test cases. See you next time.